So this tutorial is another part in the Absolute Beginner series on programming a robot using Python with Adafruit's CircuitPython boards. We've already talked about variables up to this point. We've also talked about some very basic Python syntax, and now we're going to start learning about what a forever loop is and why a forever loop might be really important to use inside a robotics project. So let's go get started. Forever loops are really critical for robotics projects because robots tend to run programs always in forever loops. They're always running their main kind of program. Anytime you turn it on, it starts running its main program. Think of a loop as a concept of something called iteration, which is a fundamental programming concept. It's a way that you can iterate or loop through concepts. So I want you to connect your CircuitPython device to your computer using a micro USB cable, and you should load up your code.py file from your CircuitPy drive. So working on this code.py, you can delete any code in, and I simply want you to write in these statements. We're going to import time. This is something called a library that we'll get more into later in the course, but effectively this is a package of code that we can use in order to have time-based functions. So we'll be able to sleep for so many seconds, to be able to pause in our code for so many milliseconds, whatever have you. And for our first loop, we're going to write while true with a colon, press return, and you'll notice that we automatically get indented. Anything that is indented is part of this while true loop. I'm going to write the word print. This is in a loop. And then I'm going to say time period sleep for 1 second. We'll go ahead and save this, and let's look at the serial port. Great. So now if we look at our output, we have this is in a loop, 1 1000, 1 1000, 1 1000, 1 1000. So we print this word, we sleep for a second, and then we print the word again. So that is effectively what a loop is doing. It is starting your while true, it's printing this, it's going to the next line. Whenever it gets to the end of that loop, it goes back up. Now something that I want you to notice is I'm going to say print end loop. Let's save this. And again, this is a loop, this is in a loop, this is in a loop, this is in a loop. We are never going to print end loop. And why do you think that might be? Well, if we look at Python, white space in Python is really, really important. When we look inside here, we have these indents. We have these indents, or 4 spaces. But this line here is not indented in line with these. Anytime we've got some sort of while statement or an if statement, we have a colon. We use these indents to denote that these 2 lines are part of a while true loop. This line is not part of a while true loop, which means that it's never going to actually print, because while true, computers only ever run true statements. And while true, it means while this condition is true, it is forever going to run this loop. The condition true is always going to run. Yeah, so it's never actually going to stop. We could even say something while 1 is equal to 1 is the exact same thing as saying, well, if 1 is equal to 1, that's true, it will forever run that, and it's actually going to print this as in a loop. But while true loop is a really common naming convention. We can also say something like print start loop. And if we were to save this over, you're going to notice that start loop is going to print once, and then this is in a loop is forever going to print. We're never going to come back up to this again, because again, we're only going to loop inside anything that's in that while true loop, and after that colon, anything that's indented counts as being part of that while true loop. Yeah. So some key takeaways of this while true loop is that programs are always going to be running something inside, or at least robots for this, almost always going to be running something inside of a while true loop. So they can constantly be running their code over and over and over and over again. So I hope you found that helpful, and best of luck with your next robotics project.